Hello, what is up, everybody? My name is Mario Pichardo. In today's video, we are going to be talking about relationships. We're going to be talking about women and men in relationships. We're going to be talking about what a man's role is, who a man is. And as I was writing a piece of my book, a book called Methods, uh, I I really sat there and I asked myself, I was like, well, I don't really know how to write it. And I kept falling back on the idea of something I'd read by a man named Rollo Tomasi, who owns a blog all about men and, the difference between men and women. He has a very well known book called The Rational Male, which I recommend a lot of people read. And if you're a man or a woman, I recommend you pick it up. I recommend you read it. Now, the first thing that I would expect to hear from people is say, "Oh, he's recommending this guy who is bad for people to listen to for whatever reason." This guy who's like, who's sexist or misogynist or whatever. And it's hard to kind of change someone's first perception, right? Because if the first thing you hear about someone is, oh, they're sexist or they're misogynist or they hate women, then that's there's literally the first impression you have. So it's hard. So then you go through just trying to validate that that's true. And that's sad. I mean, you can't really change too much of that, but still, I mean, listen, the truth needs to be said. I hope people read that book. There are a bunch of other good books that I think are worth a read. I think The 3% Man by, especially if you're a man, but also if you're a woman, I think The 3% Man by Corey Wayne is an excellent book. There are a lot of ways you can get that book for free. You can, for example, get a scribed trial and just read it there. I'm not affiliate. Full disclosure, I don't have any affiliations, so I have no conflicts of interest in any of my recommendations. I recommend them because they're good. But you have what I'm trying to get at is the fact that as a man, being a man in America, being a man in Western society, being a man globally in any considered first world country, you can look at places. You can look at the UK. Just look at Europe. Look at America. Look at Canada. Look at Australia. Look at Scandinavia. And what you find is that and I found this very eerie, is the fact that they're all pushing the same kind of agenda or the same idea for men all over the place, where they say, oh, well, if you want to be a man, then, you should be a feminist, and that if you should. And so, you see a lot of this, like, oh, you need to fight, you need to push for climate change, you need to fight for climate change, you need to do X, Y, and Z. And it's scary because I think that the fact that that same movement is going on all around the world, regardless of where people are, speaks volumes to me that it's happening at a global scale all at the same time. I think that the powers that be, the people that own all the money on these like central banks and on these like, places that where they just hold immense amounts of power, are clearly all pushing something globally. I mean, what are the odds, even in an age of the internet, that Korea, Korea, is trying to push the same kinds of policies as Scandinavia, as America, as Japan. I mean, we're talking about places that are so, far apart. Australia. It's disconcerting to me, and I don't think that it's a movement that grows organically. Because I think that a society, first world countries, all being societies that all have the same ideas, even in the world of the internet, is very odd to me. That's very strange that would just happen kind of globally all at the same time. And, we all know that there's a difference between fighting for rights and fighting people, and I think that unfortunately we've developed a society that punishes men for being men. In fact, they have a term for it. They call it toxic masculinity. They refer to it as even a man trying to explain something to a woman, mansplaining, that's the word. It's meant to be derogatory. You man, he's mansplaining to her. That you simply trying to explain something to someone who just happens to be a woman can now be considered offensive. And the college campuses, don't even get me started on those. It's very disconcerting to me, and I think that it paints a very big picture where the whole world is led to kind of follow this socialistic ideology, where we identify ourselves based on our groups as opposed to our own individual characteristics. And I've been listening to a man named Jordan Peterson, who has a lot to say on this topic, specifically. And I was reading a book that he wrote, Maps of Meaning, and I couldn't get away from the idea that people are responsible for their own actions, and that it's the actions of the individual, of you and me, that allow terrible things to happen in a society. So living in a developed nation, watching my society destroy itself with socialism, with Marxism, communism, creeping slowly in, very loudly coming in, and just kind of letting it happen is a symptom of the individual. And I think that when you look around, you also see things like, you see single family homes blow up, in correlation with the war on drugs, right? That's what Bush called it back in the day. And you see a lot of places, you see that when you break up the family, crime increases tremendously. It increases so much, and that's scary to see, but it says something that, hey, single families, statistically speaking, generally speaking, do not work in terms of keeping our young people out of prisons, out of jails. We have developed a society that I think in many ways has failed people, but in many, many ways. But at the same time, there is a silver lining there, because it means that we as individuals can rise up and claim our power back, go back out there and fight for the very same ideals that we have, that we still have as a nation. But, unfortunately, I think the one thing that really holds people back, and I think that there are a lot of things that hold people back, but the one thing that really, really, really holds us back is distraction. I think that the phone is an incredible distraction today. I think it's amazing in terms of its ability to shorten people's attention spans. We live in an age, I think, of a complete entertainment where there's so much instant gratification available that actually putting in the work to do anything has become increasingly difficult for individuals, especially when you consider that social media organizations, for example, have become sources of addiction and of distraction. I mean, distraction for useless things. I mean, you look at like a BuzzFeed article that pops up on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube, that is just like, oh, we built I watched one a little while ago, I'll admit, and it was about just like a 30-pound man bakes 30-pound donut, and I didn't watch the whole thing, but this video has hundreds and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of views. And when you think about that, it's like, well, how many videos like this do people watch? I mean, really, how many do they watch? And is this how we're spending our time now? And unfortunately, I think the answer is yes. And look, I mean, there have always been societies where individuals have been lazy, where there's always been a hierarchy, but the hierarchy is the norm for human nature. Is there will always be a hierarchy, no matter how you structure society. And I think that what a lot of socialists are trying to do is they're trying to say, well, things are not quite fair, things are not quite equal, and we need to put policies in that reward people who contribute not as much as other people to society. And so what they see is a world in which a few people are making a ton of money. You know, you have the rich class, the class that owns all the businesses and so on and so forth. They're making so much money, and they think that, well, this class needs to pay their fair share. You know, socialists, I think they really hate the rich, or at least their ideology does. And they want to tax them. But I think that they're very dishonest, because what they don't tell you is that the real people who are going to be paying the taxes for anything are you and I. Okay, it's not going to be it's not going to be. I mean, look, Jeff Bezos might pay a couple billion, right? Even if he did, he paid a couple billion. I think Amazon made about $5 billion in revenue. So let's say we take a couple. Let's say we had this incredible tax. We took like 3.5, 4 billion out of his side. Let's say we tax him at 80%, right? We took 80%. Well, that's not going to cover the majority of what we need to pay for. You know, that means that, because like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wants to implement I think it was a 70% tax on the rich. But the one thing that she does not tell her listeners, the people who, you know, are hearing her speak and are saying, oh, okay, we could do this. This is cool. Yeah, it's tax right. You know, they make so much money, is the fact that, well, while you can do it, you're being very dishonest with people in the way that you're communicating what you're saying, because they know that they're doing it. They make it sound like the tax is only going to be for the rich. The fact that they leave out is that it's not just the rich that are going to pay for it. Everyone's taxes are going to double. If you make above a certain amount, and trust me, that amount is not very high, okay, your taxes are going to increase. Your taxes are going to increase proportionally based on whatever the new marginal tax rate, or, you know, whatever you call it, the tax bracket will work. And so it's very dishonest, because they walk around and they say, oh, we'll get they're promising free stuff to people. Hey, free healthcare, everyone should have the right to healthcare. That's what Bernie Sanders and AOC say a lot. But the fact of the matter is that they're lying blatantly to people about how they're going to be able to pay for it. The only person that's going to pay for it is you and I. Okay? Wow, this got off into this was originally supposed to be a video about men, and then it kind of spiraled away, one thing after another. I guess I just have so many things on my mind that I just kind of want to get out there. But, you know, one thing leads to another, tangent. But I guess to kind of bring it back, I'm not a fan of socialism. But to bring it back to base, you know, and the reason I go out there is because it comes from a root, and the root is masculinity, or being a man. And actually, I'm glad I said all that stuff, because it says a lot about what it means, not just to be a man, but also to be a citizen. And and it goes back to an idea that Jordan Peterson is talking about in Maps of Meaning, or in his other book, 12 Rules for a Life. And that's the idea that, listen, you know, it is up to you and I to monitor society, to impose a goodwill onto society. And that if society crumbles, it's on our hands. Why? Because, well, we were the citizens. We had the power for society to do anything, you know, the gulags or the concentration camps. The responsibility for those events landed on the people, because at any point they could have said, no, we're not going to do this. But very few did. And so it happened. You know, the reason Hillary Clinton did not get elected in 2016 is because a lot of people went out to the booths and they said, no, we won't let it happen. So speaking about it, I think, you know, it's interesting, because you ultimately always want, I think, for a society to be strong and you want it for a society to be good, in good condition, in good spirits, do well financially. You don't want to see your own people starve. And I think that where the responsibility for it falls, as far as God tells us, is it falls on us, the men, ultimately. And ironically, we have a society that has created a war on men. I mean, watch the latest Gillette ad, watch the Nike ad, where people are really trying to tear down America, for example, and say that, oh, America's not great. It had slavery. It had, trust me, America had a lot of bad things, a lot of bad things. But point to me a country that hasn't done racist things, a country that hasn't done terrible things. And even if you could find me a country that did not do any of those things, it was perfectly fine. Well, what happened. That's the bottom line. Okay? So I think that, and you can understand where some of them are coming from, because I do think that while the leaders of these kinds of movements are very disingenuous, I think that a lot of the people involved in the movement are, and they really do think that they're doing a great service. And this comes back to the idea of being a man. It's up to us to kind of stand out there and say, no more. We're not going to let this happen. We're not going to let organizations go out there and tear down America, because America means something great. And I think that the way to solve any societal problem is to bring people together, not tear them apart. And I saw this political video, political art. I don't know what it's called. When it's political cartoon. And it showed Mexico, America, and a guy in a suit laying bricks down, right? And instead of putting a wall in between America and Mexico, laying the wall right there, he lays the wall not on Mexico, the Mexican-American border at all, but the 90 degree angle into America, depicting the fact that, well, instead of separating ourselves from Mexico, we're blocking ourselves and cutting ourselves off from each other, just like how Germany had the wall, East and West Germany. And our job is to not allow ourselves to be separated, not allow any organization or company or anything to stand between the individual's rights to assert their own will, to assert their own independence. But, and a big but, because Jordan talks about this as well, it's also the necessity of the individual to benefit themselves in how they speak about themselves, in how they act in their communities and act in their groups, but also in their own lives. So in other words, our commitment to society is not just externally to other people, but also to our own growth and our own development. And until we as men kind of sit back and say, well, I have to get my own life in order, then what right do we have to go out there and to legislate or declare out in the world how things should be when we ourselves don't have our own lives in order? I mean, and that's really the question that Jordan poses. And he mentions something else, which I thought was also a very interesting idea. As you can tell, I'm a little bit of a fan of Jordan Peterson. And that's because I think he says a lot of things that really hit home and that a lot of people really need to hear, even though the left doesn't want to hear it. And that's that the individual is ultimately responsible for the things that happen in the society, and that instead of looking for a life of happiness, because happiness will not always be there, it's dependent on your situation, you know, instead of focusing on happiness, the individual is meant to focus on a sense of meaning in their own lives. If you're Christian, that means that your commitment to Christ and your walk with Him, the growth spiritually there. Then if you're not, the meaning that you assign to your life. You know, Viktor Frankl, who went through the experience of the Nazi concentration camps, he comes out and he says, listen, it is the meaning associated with life is, and I'm paraphrasing, is the one that we decide for ourselves. It's the meaning that we decide to give our lives. And so when you say, what's the meaning of my life? I say back to you, what's the meaning of your life? I answer the question with the question because I don't have the answer, you do. And the other thing that Viktor Frankl espouses is the idea that no one can take control of how you feel or of your perception of the world. That in and of itself relies on you and your own life experience. And so ultimately, the meaning of your life and your experience of it is dependent on your willingness to either hold that or to give it away. And unfortunately, it looks like our society in a big way is giving it away. And so I make a case to you, you know, as you listen, as you hear this podcast or this video, if you're watching it on YouTube, that it's time to step up because there's so much going on in the world. And when the good people do nothing, evil will always prevail. And Jesus tells us, listen, there's no middle road. Okay? You're either on the side of God or you're not. The default is the side of Satan. And if you don't believe in Christ or Christ's message, then you know as well that the reason the gulags, the concentration camps, and people might say, oh, that would never happen today. Well, that wasn't very long ago. The only thing that's really changed is our cars are a little faster. We have an internet connection. But that doesn't mean they've gone away. We still have the nukes. We have more. In fact, it's probably worse. But when people do nothing, when good people do nothing, terrible things happen. We've been at war in Afghanistan and Iraq for how long? The whole Middle East, how long? Many, many years, over a decade, closer to 2 decades. Okay? The war isn't something that's going to go away. It gets more sophisticated. So, you know, I think that the silver lining here is the fact that the people have a lot of power, and the normal everyday person has more power today than they have ever had, ever. When you have something like, and I know this point has been made a lot, but you can underscore the significance of having something that you can use and you can just record. I could record a video with this and audio and post it online for free. You know, while we still have, and there are more websites that are popping up that allow you to post to certain websites where you know that no matter what you say or what you share, they explicitly protect your right to say something, even if you disagree with leftist narratives or if you want to put up so-called conspiracy theories. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think the silver lining here is that while things are bad, and they've always been bad, I mean, they've been bad. I mean, just read history. Things have always been kind of bleak, but that's not a reason to sit down and let it happen. But the fact of the matter is that today we have more power to do something about that, to fight that. And let us not give that power away. If you're sitting here and you're listening to this, it's time to stand up. And when you see someone knock a kid's hat over because he was wearing a Make America Great Again hat, it's time to fight back and say, hey, make a scene. Make a scene. Because if you don't do anything, and you just let these socialists do whatever they want to do, America will be a very different place. The Western society will be a very different place. If these people get what they want, you can expect death squads. People coming at your door. I was reading an article about, I think it was the state of Iowa, that was considering a bill that would force vaccinations on people, force them. In other words, the police, law enforcement could come to your door with the clinicians or whoever, and they can forcibly inject your children with certain vaccines if they're being homeschooled. And you think they're going to stop there? They've a couple of Democrats already come out and said that their ultimate goal is total gun confiscation. Total gun confiscation. Okay? So, and you know what happens? What always happens after they take away the guns? They start a genocide. They start killing people. People start dying. So look, let us not, and even if that sounds, alarmist, let's err on the side of caution, okay? And fight while we still have our guns, so that even if that does not happen, and no one wants it to, except the left, that we'll still have a chance to assert ourselves and assert our rights while we still have them, because they're also trying to take away the First Amendment if you're American. Because I think that we have a great thing going here, and it'd be a shame to just lose it altogether. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to this recording. We've been going here. Actually, we've only been going 28 minutes. Let's go a little bit longer and talk about a couple more things. I actually thought this podcast was going a lot longer already. If you're listening to this, you can clearly hear that I do not edit recordings. I kind of just like to let them go all the way through, because I want to get used to kind of just doing the one take, get used to living in that kind of candid atmosphere. Nope, it's just the one take. This is what it is posted, I think there's a great level of genuineness to that, and the genuineness. And I think that what the West is missing is a sense of candor, honesty. I think a lot of things are hidden behind words that are meant to sound pretty. And the fact of the matter is that, well, not everything is meant to be that way, So as a man, you have a duty to protect your wife, okay? Protect your children. Make sure that they have food at the table, okay? And if your wife is the breadwinner, it's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as there's food on the table. But look, let us not forget, what it originally meant to be a man, okay? Look, the sexes don't just change, okay? You can't just just because we live in a new century or the culture has changed doesn't mean that, for example, the biblical definition of a man changes. It doesn't. We shouldn't pick our principles based on cultural relativism, okay? Because that would say that well, maybe we, are bad. Maybe we think it's okay to kill people, but at least we don't rape people like this other country. That's an extreme case, but that's cultural relativism. Okay, we want to base our values on something that's strong. The Bible, the Ten Commandments. Don't cheat your brother. Treat your neighbor as yourself. That's essentially the tenet as far as it goes to the treatment of someone next to you. And the first tenet will always be, have no one else before your God. Love your God with your heart, soul, and mind. Jesus said, he put it down into two tenets. He said the first one is to love your God with your heart, soul, and mind. The second one, to love your neighbor with your heart, soul, and mind. And those are the tenets. Those are the tenets that espouse Christian Judeo values. And what was Western society built on? Christian Judeo values. Why? Because those values show a sacredness to life. And they show that life matters more than we thought it does, and encourages societies that support one another, that support the individuals in those societies, even the poor. But it doesn't force anything on the people in terms of forcing someone to give up X, Y, or Z, forcing people to donate to charity, forcing, what the socialists are trying to do. It's not meant to be that way, because it's about loving your neighbor, not about putting a gun to your neighbor's head like the government likes to do when every time it drops a new law. If you don't want to follow this law, oh, okay, we'll take your money, we'll put you on jail. It's up to the people. It's up to you and me to control the government, to control the control that the government's allowed to have. And you could look back at history and you could see that there's always an economic cycle that occurs throughout the ages. Actually, something that's explained in this book that I have right here. This is gold. If you guys aren't, for you guys listening to the podcast, I'm holding up a copy of Gold and Silver, which is a book written by a man named Mike Maloney, who talks about an impending economic crisis and where people should be putting their money, if they have, to protect themselves from an upcoming potential hyperinflation, deflation. But anyway, one of the points that he makes in this book, and I highly recommend you guys to learn who Mike Maloney is. He has a very fun to watch series on YouTube called The Hidden Secrets of Money. That's definitely, this is falling over here. That's definitely worth, for any of you, for you guys on the podcast, I have a stack of books and it almost fell. Okay, let me just not mess with this. There's an impending economic crisis, and it would do each and every one of us it would do us well to protect ourselves or hedge ourselves against a potential disastrous financial situation in the future. So if you haven't read the book, I highly recommend it as well. Again, I have no incentive to or conflict of interest with recommendations. And if I ever do, I will let you guys know. But anyway, one of the things that's talked about in this book is that if you track the economy throughout history, you'll start to notice that there are patterns that just kind of show up, and they show up again, and they show up again, and they show up again. And these patterns are kind of patterns of a society gaining money, okay? Spending that, going to war, spending the money on social programs, losing all of the money. And then they experience something called a hyperinflation, where because when they started going to war, when they started to all these new social programs like we're trying to do now, even though the country's already deeply, deeply in debt, the country prints their money into oblivion, essentially, which causes prices of everything to rise. And you have something just like what you had in Germany, where their currency, you couldn't buy anything with it. It was virtually useless because the banks printed so much money using something called quantitative easing, which is what that term is called. So when you just print more money into the money supply, quantitative easing. They printed so much money into the new money supply that the money was worthless, and people used it for fire. They just burned it because it was so worthless. It wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. And so Mike talks about that potentially happening in the United States. Or he says that it will certainly happen in the United States, and that you should protect yourself by buying gold and silver. But read the book, because I think that it talks gets a lot into a lot more detail. It tells you some things you should know, how to find a reputable dealer, so on and so forth, if you so choose to do that. I highly recommend that if you want to help protect your family, that you look into his work, that you look into learning more about gold and silver. Oh, and especially that you find a reputable dealer, by the way, if you want to go down that route. I would highly recommend that if you were going to do it, you do it soon, because the prices of gold and silver, of other precious metals, are right now being held down at incredible values. So I would highly recommend giving that a shot, trying that out, learning more about that kind of stuff, to strengthen your financial fortitude, let's say. So, I mean, with that, going back to the idea of just what it means to be a man, I think that another thing a man needs to realize is that we are at war. I mean, we're at war with the media, and unfortunately, I think also that means that we're at war with one another. And I think that that's the plan all along. When you think about people who are in power, their opus is to protect what they have. And how do you do that? Well, you keep the people from breaking down your door and taking it, And how do you do that? You do that by pitting people against one another. And I think that when you look at our society, and I think it's more complicated than that, but I think that when you look at our society, we have a society that's men versus women. Okay, that's intersectional versus straight white male. When you see these things depicted in movies, and you see them depicted everywhere online, on all of these websites and all of these even video game websites espousing these leftist ideas that, it's great because this person's a woman in this show. Things aren't based on merit. They're based on factors that people cannot always control for, like their gender. Okay. So, if I was born a female, I get celebrated simply for something that I had no control over. And so a society is trying to be built where people benefit based on factors that in some factors they simply can't control for. And this society wants to, an increasingly socialistic society that wants to benefit people who haven't produced any goods for society. In other words, they want to steal from one person to give to someone else. They want to take your hard-earned money and give it to someone who might be on their knees. I mean, someone who is really hurting financially, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with helping people, but there is something wrong with forcing people to help other people. And the fact that they're being so disingenuous when they tell the people that, it turns out that when people actually find out the actual cost of something like Medicare for All or the Green New Deal, and how much it's actually going to cost the actual American, in other words, how much the person who is being asked the question is going to have to pay, that their tax rates are going to double, all of a sudden a lot less people are interested in implementing this kind of stuff. And the fact of the matter seems to always be that, and obviously in a general case, I'm not saying this is absolutely everybody, but that in a general case, it seems to be, at least as far as the comical part of it goes, that the people who espouse the ideas are typically the people who haven't worked haven't ever started their own business, haven't ever put real value into society to know the value that that work offers, but also that they don't really have an understanding of something like economics, where you very quickly see is, well, if you want to tax the rich so much, but you do that, you very easily forget that the reason that anybody even has the jobs that they have now is because the rich needed to pay people, right, to produce more goods. In other words, you want to put the people out of business who are providing all of the jobs for a society. How does that work? Because the very class you're claiming to protect are going to be the biggest uh, people affected by that kind of move. I mean, I think it was 2017. I think Andrew Cuomo, who's the governor of New York at the time, still is. I think he got reelected. Said that in 2017 he signed an act called something about fast food and raising the minimum wage for fast food workers. And what they found is that when they did that, a lot of restaurants closed. A lot of restaurants had to fire people, had to lay people off, had to shorten the hours people had, because I think that there's this like kind of idea that, oh, well, if you own a big, if you have a lot of stores, or if you're a big company, that means that you can afford to pay people higher than their quote unquote worth, based on the job that they're paying, the job that they're working. And the fact of the matter is that what people don't realize is that not all the time, but not every business can afford to pay a certain amount of money. At some point, it's too much. You can't force a business to pay more than to pay its employees more than it actually can pay them. That it can actually objectively afford to pay them without going into the red. And that's why we have limits on how much we're willing to pay people. I mean, this is just basic economics. I can't pay somebody $50 an hour if my business brings in half that in revenue. It's not going to work. Where am I going to get the money from? But the government says, oh, but you need to pay everybody a living wage. Well, now your desire for that is put even more people out of work. And the people that are working fewer hours. So in other words, this great espousing idea of everybody should be able to is made by people who haven't really thought through, okay, well, why hasn't this happened before? Why is our society all of a sudden this great enlightened society in which we the founding class have found all the answers that no one in society has ever been able to find before in the thousands of years the earth has been around? It's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. It is that a society could think that it has somehow found the answer to everything, and that the society is now enlightened. And I think that it's just the wrong way to go about things. And again, it points back to the duty of the individual to his society, to his culture, to the world that he lives in, and Jordan talks about this as well, the need for them to take responsibility for their own lives, and that the meaning of life is found in taking responsibility for life. Because living a life of, but living a life of pure pleasure, living a life, or even deciding that life's meaningless and living a life like that isn't worth much. It's not. Much better to live a life of meaning, and meaning is intrinsically found in responsibility, than to live a life of floating instant gratifications. One of the things that people find very fun, for lack of a better word, is that feeling like they've made progress makes people feel very good about their lives. Now imagine if the thing that you were making progress in your life with was something that you found to be deeply meaningful. Now that's beautiful, isn't it? Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that something? So the duty for man, I think, is there. I think the duty for the society to support men is not. And I think it's up for man to support his fellow man. It's up for man to, but it's up to man first to get his own life together. And that before he goes out and tries to change the world and fight climate change and fight X, Y, and Z, at first a man needs to get his own life in order, deal with his weight problems, deal with his relationship problems, deal with his finance problems, get his life in good working order. Why? Because how can we, as individuals, where there have been thousands of people before us and no one has been able to figure it out, how can we claim to be able to do so when we are, and I think in a fair amount of cases, potentially even less educated, even though we have access to more education than anyone at any time, at any point in history before us? How can we espouse to be the ones that know what to do? It doesn't work that way, So as a man, I find myself in a position where I need to take responsibility. That if I want to be healthy, I make sure that I feed myself nutritional foods. That if I want to be physically fit, that I make sure that I work out. That if I want to be financially well off, that I put in the time and I put in the hours to find myself in a position where I can be well off. That I strengthen my relationships by doing what? By being honest. How about starting there? Telling the truth, not lying to people about anything. Building a strong character. And it's up to me to do that. And building a character, listen, building a character is hard. Building a character is not something that is very easy for a lot of people, but it is something that's worth it. And you know why? Because think about, what do you have if you don't have other people? I mean, really, imagine yourself with $1 billion versus imagine yourself making $40,000, $50,000 a year, where, let's say you could afford your own apartment, your own everything. You have the furniture, you have the TV, you have all the stuff that you could want, you have food in the fridge, you have all this stuff, you can afford to feed your family, X, Y, and Z. But what in your life brings you the most joy? Usually it's something related to someone else, right? Related to other people, your relationships, in other words. And what about your relationships? What can you offer someone that no one else can? What part of you is intrinsically you? Your character. Your character, your ideas, but also how you treat people, how you act towards people. Relationships are the most important things in our lives. And what does God say? What are the two tenets? Love your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Your relationship, your first relationship. And love your brother and sister. That comes after. Love your neighbor like yourself. Love your neighbor with all your heart, with all your soul, and with your mind. Okay, that's number 2. And what does that say? That's it. That says it all. Why do you want the rich car? Why do you want to have all the money? So you can do things, so you can go places, so you can meet people, so that you can do activities, so that you can live whatever kind of life you want to live. But intrinsically, that future entails other people, and it entails those relationships, it entails those. And if you trust me, if you don't have them and you live a life of solitude, listen, for some people that's fine, that's great. But I think that for the majority of people, looking at what it means to be a person, the people are intrinsically self that people are intrinsically self. I lost my thought. If we want to be better people, it's up to us, it's up to you and me to do the work that we need to do in order to be the kinds of people that we want to be, to espouse the right ideas, to share the right stories, to be exemplary of what a strong society is. And you know that a strong society will always look back and rely on those people who are there being strong, to those people who are there willing to share the ideas, the motives, the everything that it takes to be someone who is strong, to be someone who has something to say. I mean, can you just imagine yourself being the individual, if you're not already, the one who is there, who is, when people have a problem, they come to you. They ask you for advice. Okay, they ask you for help. Now, whether you should just give them an answer, that's a completely different topic or different discussion, right? Because you want them to grow. The best thing you can do for someone else is help them to develop themselves, to be self-sufficient, to be, and it's funny that when I say that, because if the best thing you can do for someone else is to make them self-sufficient, and you think about what socialism is saying, no, we don't want you to be self-sufficient. In other words, it's the worst thing you can do for another person, because you make that their needs and their desires dependent on another person. And that's sad, because that's not where people are meant to be. If you really love someone else, you'd want them to be able to have control over their own lives. You would want them to be crippled. And so, you know, ladies and gentlemen, we look back at our own lives. We have to ask ourselves, am I doing the things that I should be doing right now? And if not, do I understand what I'm doing? Do I know what I'm doing? Do I really know what I'm doing? And am I okay with that? And at the end of the day, you know, when the judgment comes from God, based on the ideal that he's laid out for us of who we ought to be, we're ultimately going to have to measure up to that and say, well, did I do it or did I not? Did I stand behind on the sidelines of life while bad things were happening in my family, in my community, in my own life? Because it's not just about the things that you say, it's about the things that you don't say. In other words, it's not just about your action, but your inaction. Your inaction matters. And I think a lot of the time people choose inaction. They'd rather be passive than to be active. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And some of those reasons I think that by and large are out of people's control. I mean, for example, there's endocrine disruptors, estrogen mimicking compounds, chemical compounds from synthetics all over the place. Like BPA, which is estrogen, I think, mimicker, it's testosterone blocker or something like that. Anyway, it affects you hormonally to change your levels of aggression, to change your levels of masculinity. And listen, I think that you know is intrinsically something that is resulting in our society not being willing or not being open to be more aggressive and fight for the things that our society needs. And I think it is a part of what's leading to men being feminized and weak, for lack of a better term, just weak, like sissies, you know? And I think our society needs men, but it doesn't just need men. It needs women who are willing to be obedient to their men. I was reading about women back in, you know, the 50s, back in the 40s, and they loved their lives. Listen, those women did not want the freedoms that they were given because they didn't want to have to deal with all the harshness of it. Okay, so this idea that women were feeling, in and of themselves, were feeling oppressed, that they were feeling like the world was pushing them down is not true. That's part of another narrative. And women are now led to believe, you know, that you've been oppressed. It's not true. You know, that's one of the biggest tactics of this left, so don't listen to them. Okay, women did not want this. Women are less happy today having their own independent jobs, having their own. And listen, no one ever said that women cannot do that, in that they were not mentally or physically capable of being able to do these things. No one believes that they are not capable of doing that. I don't believe that. I think the women are certainly capable of it. But it doesn't change the fact. I mean, if we're going to measure things based on happiness, if we're going to measure things based on how it makes people feel, if we're going to measure things, I mean, what actually matters when it comes to measuring things? Because if we're measuring things based on how much freedom that we have, or how much, because we have access to even more books now, or more choices of watching, or things like that, but people's happiness levels are actually going down. Why? Because there's fewer relationships. We're isolated. But for women, for them, they're less happy because they had a very, very, very meaningful, and I just can't overstate this. They had a very, 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 very meaningful life in taking care of the children at home. A very meaningful life, and there was nothing wrong with that. In fact, the only person that ever stood out and said that there was something wrong with that were these communists, back in the day, who wanted to give women the right to this, give women the right to that. Women did not, and it might be hard to believe, women did not want that. They were happy. Now they're less happy. So what was it worth? If you want to find a life of meaning, I mean, if we're going to sit here and say that, men need to base their lives, or individuals need to base their lives in a sense of meaning rather than a sense of happiness, what greater sense of meaning? And I cannot stress this point enough. What greater sense of meaning can one find other than providing for your family, which was the man's role ordained by God, than to be the caretaker of your children? How can we even fathom the importance of that? And what ended up happening, out of this movement, women went into the workplace. And then what happened to the kids? They went where? They got raised by the state. They got raised by the government. Why? Because the parents are working all day. They get home and they're exhausted. So what's left to be done? Nothing. Then they go on YouTube. So, we have to, I think, look at it and say, well, what is happening to the children? The greatest asset, right? And we're going to shame women for being mothers home with their kids? Are you kidding me? Some of the one of the absolute, I mean, it can only ever be in the top two. And really they're equal. If not, honestly, I think the caretaking of the children is probably more important, to be honest, than the man's role, than being the breadwinner. Taking care of those children is like, so I think the women were led to give that up for reasons that were very disingenuous. And it's a lie, just like how the left lies today. Oh, you're being oppressed again, as this, as that, as Bernie says. Don't buy it. Just don't buy it. Don't listen to this guy. Don't listen to these clowns. Okay? It's... If we want to be strong as a nation, as a country, as people, regardless of whatever country you're in, if you're in the UK, if you're in a Scandinavian country, if you're in Europe, if you're in anywhere, it doesn't matter. I don't think Western culture is the best. But I don't think that it's because it's racist. I think it's because it's becoming socialistic. And that damages a society. It really does. The government doesn't need more control over people's lives. It needs less. When the government becomes authoritarian, what happens? Mussolini, Hitler, Stalin, the gulags, concentration camps. So we have a role to play, ladies and gentlemen. In this episode, I wanted to talk about the role of the man, the role of the family, and I think that we've done that successfully. This is our longest show yet, our longest episode yet, and I'm very happy with that. I wanted to get it to about an hour. I'm hoping that future episodes are going to be about as long. I want to keep it at about that time. And because of how long that is, it's kind of hard to stop it and then do another take, especially considering that I work. So, I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening on podcast services, and you like this, like these kinds of this kind of content, feel free to like it, share it, spread it out, get the word out. You know what I mean? And I think that it's concerning because you see a lot of companies taking people out, deplatforming people who share views like mine, who are against the democratic narrative, trying to speak truth to not just the power, but to the general public, to kind of wake them up, to try to wake people up. So you see people who used to use things like Patreon, deplatformed. You can't use the service anymore. Even Chase Bank, deplatforming people. Oh, you can't use this. Oh, it's because he's a white nationalist. Which, listen, may be true. Okay? Look, I'm not saying that people who are being kicked off of some of these sites are not what they're being espoused to be, but the fact of the matter is that, like, listen, we let Facebook control the news, what news we see. Okay? Facebook has incredible control already because it has profiles on, I think, over 1 billion people, maybe even be 2 billion, I don't know, but over 1 billion people. Okay, that is an incredible. You cannot overstate how much power that company has. But then to go on and to say that, well, also, we're going to give them this power and this power and this power. We have to take our power back as people. Okay, don't get your news from Facebook. I hope you, if you get your news from social media, I can't help you. I mean, I just can't. We just can't do anything for you here. But in the event that I end up getting deplatformed here, I mean, I'll put it up somewhere else, but it's up to us. That's it. That's the message. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like this video, share with your friends, share with your family. This has been Methods, a podcast about meaning. It's a podcast about growth. And it is a podcast about being real. Okay, so listen, I hope this video has been good. If you're listening to the podcast, I hope this podcast has been great for you. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take it easy. Peace.